Hi everyone, welcome back to another session of ADEX Pixel Expo 8 monthly webinar global webcast November series. So happening on every 8th of the month as we convene over a united cause, that is our love for diving and the ocean. And for today's session, there's a sharing call in conversation with David Strike to Hidden Depths, along with Evan Kovac. David Strike is a former instructor, trainer, and certifier with a background in military, commercial, and recreational diving. David also has a background in technical diving. David has authored several hundred dive-related articles, and he is the ADEX Ambassador for Technical Diving. He's also the recipient of the ADEX Lifetime Achievement Award and a fellowship of the Explorers Club of New York. Evan Kovac has led and participated in expeditions to survey and film wrecks, deep-sea hydrothermal vents, and underwater mountains. He owns Marine Imaging Technologies, a company that specializes in imaging the underwater world. Over the past 15 years, he has worked with Woodhull Oceanographic Institution to help build and operate numerous imaging systems for broadcast television, museums, scientists, and institutions worldwide. His underwater and topside work has been featured on sites like National Geographic, History Channel, and the Discovery Channel. Now we will let David moderate the session with Evan as he shares his underwater feats with us. The floor is yours, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Kushi. Excellent. Evan, thank you so much for making the effort to crawl out of bed at some ungodly hour in New York time. It's what, 4 o'clock in the morning there?
It's 4:02 and counting. Yeah, no, and it's definitely a little bit earlier. We made this time. I forgot about daylight savings and was a little paranoid about screwing up the time. So I was up at about 1 o'clock this morning, just double checking on my phone, making sure Singapore time hasn't changed somehow. So I'm well, very happy to be here.
Mate, and it's, I guess for you, it's rather unusual because you're the person that's always behind the camera. Yeah. So this is quite unusual to see you in front of it.
Yeah, it's, I do talk sometimes, but I definitely, I have not done many one-on-one sessions like this for sure. It's, I feel much more comfortable, even being behind like a little GoPro, but I'm much more comfortable behind the camera for sure.
Yeah, and what an impressive sort of career you've had. How did you actually start? What's your background, Evan?
Well, my background, I was actually an actor at when I first started, and I was in theater for almost a decade. And but when I was 16, I started scuba diving, and like all of us probably here, I went underwater and had in a canal in Long Island with boats going overhead, and absolutely fell in love with no visibility and just being underwater. And that as I sort of got older, I just kept working on dive boats and going out and continuing just to dive for fun. And in around 2000, a friend of mine, Richie Kohler, who I think has been on here with you, he called me up and he's like, hey, we're doing this show, and the cameraman's looking for somebody to do some help out, do some lighting. I'm like, oh, hey, that sounds kind of cool. And coincidentally, at this time in my career, I was working up at Lincoln Center. I was a lighting designer. I was producing concerts. I was much into the technical theater scene, and I just started doing live from Lincoln Center. So we were doing jazz shows, and I was learning how to light that for TV. And the guy called me up, and we talked, and we hit it off, and then next thing you know, I was driving down to North Carolina in a car. I left a day early because I was afraid my car wasn't going to make it. Kind of like this phone call. But I left a day early, got down there and spent a few days and we just shot a submarine. And I absolutely, I was already enamored with being underwater, but I immediately was like, wow, now I can tell a story, which is really what my background was all about. The theater was about storytelling and being able to help people relate to something and just being down underwater, watching the camera. And then, I wasn't doing anything outside of just holding some lights, and, our cameraman at the time ran out of gas in the submarine. So I, gave him some gas and we kept filming.
This was the submarine, the
352.
Yeah.
In North Carolina. Yeah.
Right.
And so we kept going, and I came out to literally a changed person. Like, wow, I've got to do more of this. And of course the show got picked up, and we spent the next 4 or 5 years literally just on the road, traveling the world, filming. And I worked my way up, and really I always liken it to, it was almost like going to boot camp, and then for underwater filmmaking, because we were just shooting day in, day out. And again, at the time, I just started doing lighting, but worked my way up to behind the camera, and then director of photography for the show. And
this was the Shipwreck Detective series.
I'm sorry, Deep Sea Detectives. Yes,
Deep Sea Detective. Right.
Yeah, it was with Richie Kohler and John Chatterton.
Yeah,
and stuff like that. So
right.
It was great. Led to
whereabouts did that well, presumably around the world.
Yeah, we the only place we really didn't get to on that show was was the poles,
Really?
So it was pretty fantastic. We there were, like any show on TV, it's called Deep Sea Detectives, and there were somewhat contrived mysteries, and it had a formulaic History Channel show to it, but for the most part, we enjoyed it. We tried to do I think a general service to the story, and there were a couple ones where we actually, as not so much in the underwater part, but as in the research, actually discovered things, found some people, and put a couple of clues together, so to speak. So it was fascinating and a lot of fun, and cheesy and cheeky, and all the things that any working in TV can be. But it was great. And for somebody in their, I think it was my mid to late 20s at that point, it was just eye-opening and amazing. So. And
you would have been working with two sort of terrific people there.
Oh yeah, no,
Richie
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, Richie and John were a blast, and I mean, again, it was a great when you think about doing a trade, for example, they're always talking about mentors and apprenticeships. And in many ways, that's what that was for me. The cameraman was an incredibly, generous person at that point, and really, took me under his wing and just let me do as much as I wanted to do. And then eventually he left the show for the last season, and they bumped me up. And it was from there that we finished the show, and we did a couple of little, just shooting some miscellaneous films and stuff. And I was like, this TV stuff is great. we want to do more of it. And then Richie called up, and he's like, hey, so we're going to go to Titanic. I'm like, that's pretty good. I like Titanic.
So you brushed up the snorkel, and
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, well, how are we going to train for that? That's deep, isn't it? And so the deal was, we were going out with the Russians. So we were going out on the Keldysh. We were taking the Mir submersibles. And this was my first, in the show, we'd worked with ROVs a little bit. I don't think we ever worked with a sub on the show, that at least not that I was there for. Oh. And, so this was my first, just introduction. And it's not just an intro. Again, it's like a crash course. You're going to two of the most famous submarines out there. The only one more famous is Alvin. And so the deal was, they're like, okay, look, we're going out. We've got 5 days of diving. We're not going to pay you, but you can go for a dive. I'm like, done, sold, sign me up. Of course I'm going. Who says no to that? So, we went up to St. John's. We went out, and on our way out, the captain comes down, and they talk. We have a meeting. They're like, well, we have a little problem. There's a little Hurricane Katrina. So Hurricane Katrina was, while we were out there, unfortunately, doing great damage to New Orleans, and then it came up the coast and blew us off the wreck early. So I never got to dive on the sub, in the sub, but I got to spend a lot of time in the sub. And probably the most important part of all of that was, it was my introduction to Titanic and the introduction to Woods Hole. So there was a gentleman there and a young woman from Woods Hole, and they had put the cameras on the submarines, and his name was Bill Lang. He had a lab called the Advanced Imaging Lab, and it was again, for somebody that was like technically oriented and just sort of interested in storytelling. I'm like, oh my God, this is the next frontier. And of course, the guy has been collecting footage that is just astounding, for years and years. So, sorry, this is a very long story, but
actually, I was going to say, I'll come back to that in a moment. The Woods Hole Institute, because that's just up there with one of the world's great oceanographic institutions.
Yeah, they are. They're an incredible, really an incredible place that's been around. I think they're the oldest and largest nonprofit, privately owned oceanographic institution in the world. And I mean, and it's a great place to hang out and work. It's a small little campus in one of in a town called Woods Hole. And, it's always written up as one of the places that you really want to go visit. And so during the summer it is absolutely packed, and all you want to do is get on a boat and get out of town. And then during the winter, it's nice and quiet, and just it's a great place. Which is, I mean, actually, Cape Cod in general, where I live right now, is just it's a beautiful spot. So.
Sorry, back to the Titanic. So there you were.
Yeah. So no, there we were, and my the introduction was, they went down, they got to go down, and I got to go in the subs and install the cameras and learn with Bill, and learn about the black arts of video inside of a little titanium sphere. It was interesting and challenging, and we were up all night. I mean, I wasn't even supposed to be doing this with them, but of course I liked it. And I was up all night with Bill building cables and soldering this, and of course we hit it off. I mean, he yelled at me quite a bit, but we still hit it off. And it was good. And then at the time, I was let's see, we would bring all the footage up and start to go through it, and it was just a very different level. It was like going from riding a tricycle to going to a motorcycle, overnight, and it was great. It was great.
How many people did the submersible hold?
The submersibles hold 3 people. So at least that particular sub, they hold 3. You've got a pilot and then 2 observers. Right. So and there's lots of great stories about them and whatnot, because we had when we did go out, Ralph White was with us, and there were just a number of characters, let's say, on that particular project. So, but I mean, that was one of the last commercial projects that the Mears did, and after that, they went to Russia, and the Keldysh, the ship, it wasn't decommissioned, but they pulled the subs off. They put them out in Lake Baikal, and I'm sure, I think they're still around. I think they're still being used, but that was sort of the end of an era. And of course, it was the last manned trip to Titanic until this year. We were out in 2010, but that was for a mapping expedition, which was awesome. But that was the last manned trip until this year. So, or last year actually.
Just back a bit. Some of the diving that you would have done with the Deep Sea Detective series, it would have been quite. What sort of equipment were you using?
Well, that was again part of like the boot camp of the whole thing. We started off open circuit, and whenever we would travel around, we'd go and we would basically just dive whatever anybody was diving. So of course we brought gear, but sometimes it was more fun to mount your tanks upside down and dive at the French way, that day. And then eventually we moved into, as the show went on. I mean, the first year was like, hey, I can't believe we're doing this. And then of course it got a little bit more, methodical, I think, as time went on. And I started working on a lot of the logistics. And John and I were diving closed circuit, and Richie was not. And Richie at the time was like, I'll never dive a rebreather. They'll kill everybody. But the classic, take a lot of time and watch people sort of learn approach and berate them along the way. But
so what were you using? You were using the Inspiration, or
we were using the Inspiration and the Evolution, and we used them. I mean, in and out, day in, day out for 4 years, and they were fantastic. You know, we even had times we were doing stuff down in a cave. It was a cave show. I think it was in Bahamas, or no, it was Dominican Republic. That's right. And, you know, we'd hike it into the jungle, you know, walk all the way in. And there was one particular system, and I can't remember if Richie was on, but I know that this was, he was on by this point. But getting down was sort of like a nice ramp going down to the, you know, the cenote. And I believe it was Richie actually who fell, went down on his back carrying the rebreather, boom, 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 into the water. We're like, wow, I think we're gonna need some new equipment. And you know, we went down. Sure enough, the box was cracked, but the rebreather was still there. We were like, wow, this is a workhorse of a unit, and it was, and it, you know, it still is. But yeah, they were fantastic, and you know, I never had a complaint. I mean, I never lost it. That I have lost a work dive on every unit except that, you know, the 4 years that we were diving the Inspo and the Evolution. So
Yeah.
that was really nice.
And how did you, what happened after the Deep Sea Detective series? Because ultimately you got into other areas, didn't you? The History Channel.
No, absolutely. Well, you know, it all goes back to Titanic. You know, it's interesting, David, because I've never had a resume. I've never put a resume together. I've never, you know, I mean, for stuff like this, I had to start doing bios. But my entire career, from schooling on my whole professional level, has always been like, I met somebody on a subway, changed the trajectory of my life. Met somebody on an elevator, changed the trajectory of my life. And then, of course, I met somebody on a ship. I met a couple of people on the ship, and this was out on Titanic. And that, again, completely changed the trajectory of where I was going. So when I met the folks from Woods Hole, I was like, oh, this is great, you know, fun. And I never thought I'd see them again. You know, like a lot of these projects, you know, you go, you work on them, and then maybe you bump into them 5-6 years later. But we did Titanic in, I think it was 2005. And then in 2006, we were doing another couple of shows on the sister ship, Britannic. And that was like, you know, finally I could dive, you know, I mean, dive for real. And the folks at the History Channel and the producers wanted the continuity of sort of the camera systems that we had from Titanic to bring out to Britannic. And so the guys from Woods Hole, Bill, called up and said, hey, could you come up and work with us for a bit and sort of make these kind of help us get it diver ready? Because, you know, you've got a lot of engineers who are, you know, incredibly smart people, but, you know, they want to go and take these gigantic titanium tubes that weigh, you know, 150 pounds and, you know, put big tethers on them. Like, well, that's not going to work so well. Can we lighten this up a little bit? You know? So it was a blast. You know, I went up a bunch of times over the course of the spring and summer. We take these things into a pool. I'd say, well, can we do this, this, and this? And they change it around. And eventually we ended up with a whole new set of cameras that were kind of diver ready. And we went out and dove Britannic and, you know, had this fantastic expedition. And at the end of it, the guy Bill was like, hey, you know, this was really good. And of course we sort of become friends at that point. And he said, why, you know, would you like to come work with me? I'm like, well, you know, I'm doing a lot of stuff, but sure, yeah, I'll come up a little bit. And so I commuted from New Jersey, which was like a 4.5-5 hour drive. And I did that for a bit. And I was like, you know, I really, I'll back up one little moment. You know, I went up there and I'm like, all right, well, you know, what do I do? What's the first thing we're going to do? What are we going to build? And he's like, here. And he comes in and literally a little box, and dumps a pile of circuit boards, brings in a chassis and a housing. And he goes, this all goes together. And I'm like, well, what? How? And he's like, here's a book, you know. This pile of circuit boards, and I'm like, oh, okay. So I had a little help, of course, but that was sort of the introduction. I'm like, I love it. It's trial by fire, you know. So it was great, and that was if Deep Sea Detectives was boot camp, working at Woods Hole was like going to grad school for you know, upper level engineering and storytelling. And to be honest, it was what I mean, it's what sort of brought me here. It's a combination of engineering and getting, you know, field operations and storytelling. And most of the time we still do. I mean, we want to get a shot, we want to tell a story, we want to do something, and the equipment's not there, or it's not right, or it's not ready. So we build it, we modify it, whatever it takes to.
So you literally build it from the ground floor up.
Exactly. So, I mean, the only thing when I first started there, they would build a couple of cameras, but it's just not worth it anymore. So mostly what we do now is we'll take cameras and sometimes we tear them apart to get them smaller, but we'll repackage them and, put them in, well, like this thing here. This is our vehicle. It's a little ROV that we built that was designed to carry, particular like high-end cameras for storytelling. And because we were constantly getting asked, like, oh, can you put this here? Can you put this here? I'm like, yeah, this is kind of silly. Why don't we just build our own and be done with it? And so that's what we did. But that was the ethos, and it is the ethos of a lot of the stuff that we do. So, if the equipment's there, great. If it's not, well, let's build it. Let's make it. Let's get out there and use it. So it's a great loop. We conceive, design, build, operate, refine, and then go back out and do it again. So
what sort of projects were you working on there with Woods Hole?
Oh man. Well, so that's where so one of the first things that when I got there, the camera that pile of circuit boards, what I didn't know was that I was going to be taking that out with Alvin. So Alvin is the world's oldest and deepest, well, not deepest not anymore, but the world's oldest and first human submersible for the deep submergence. And of course I learned that. I'm like, oh my God, this is fantastic. Well, that was one camera. And then Woods Hole, the lab, had built and developed a whole 3D system. And that was sort of, although I was familiar with 3D to me was like, the stuff when we were kids, the red and the green, and put it on. And so I helped them, not so much design, but just fit and package this into a deep water system. And for 6 months, that's what I did. I rebuilt that camera, put the 3D system together, and just learn the ins and outs of it, which was great because eventually, I show up in Mexico with 20, 30 cases of gear and, not knowing anybody really on the submersible yet. And we went out and there is a absolute definite black art to making analog video signals work inside a submersible. And there's just so much weird electrical stuff going on that you get all this noise. And of course, for many people, a scientist at the time, they don't want the noise, but hey, they have an image, and that's not the way I work. I'm like, no, not the way we work. I mean, we need something. And when you go down in a submarine, if you're a scientist, you may go and you're filming something. This may be the only data set you ever get in your entire career for this one spot. And regardless, even if you do get back there, well, now you've got a temporal time study, and that to me is so critical. So like it's something that we never want to forget or lose sight of. It's not like doing a film where it's like, oh, let's do it again, but do it better this time. This is we're going down, and this is real data. This is the whole crux. Sometimes the imagery is your whole data set, and that's everything. You've got millions of dollars in a single cruise coming down to several hours of video. So I don't want some squiggly lines going through it. I mean, that to me is just like, I can't even look at stuff like that. I mean, we do, of course, but I don't want to look at it. So anyway, we take all these cameras and we start mounting them on the sub, and of course we have nothing but problems. And for the several day transit, it was working on this, and I was working with their engineers, and eventually, we classic got it all working as the sub was going into the water, and there was a little bit of okay, I think it's okay, and it was great. And basically, I spent 6 weeks out at sea filming hydrothermal vents, and
wow,
it was the Eastern Pacific.
What sort of depth? I mean, that's whoa. What sort of depth?
That was about 3,000 meters. So
right. So now the cameras, are they inside looking out, or are they mounted on the outside?
No, these are all mounted on the outside. So, and there's a number of reasons for that. But generally speaking, when they're outside, we can control the lighting. We have less of an interface, and we have better optics, because although the submersible, you're looking through a port, which is an acrylic port. It's about 6 inches thick. It's conical. So, for seating purposes, the port is like this, and you're looking through a hole like that. And so that's great, but it's not ideal for filmmaking. Now, that being said, when they took the IMAX camera in there, they actually took the camera apart, rebuilt it in the submarine, had a brand new port made that was acrylic and whatnot, and they shot through that front port. But of course, that port is the pilot's area. So the pilot's sitting there having to, fly with, fly out the side and fly just with camera views. It's almost like an ROV at that point. But so for the most part, all the cameras are exterior.
How many crew in Alvin?
Three. So right. 3 is pretty much Ocean Gate, as far as I know, anyway, is the first the first company to build something that takes more than 3 people, at least commercially now. At some point, that's not to say there's some other experiment, but almost all of the submersibles, because if you think about it, they're based on a sphere, and that sphere is roughly 5 to 6 feet in diameter. And you can only fit so much gear, life support, electronics, and people. I mean, they are not built for comfort. You're like, okay, you come down a little hole, you get down, you're like, oh boy, where's everybody going? Like, no, you get over there. And of course, it's not like you have a comfortable seat. You have it's almost like a little bunk half the time, and you kind of push your way in, and you can half sit up. No, they're not very comfortable, but they are a lot of fun, and there's nothing else like it.
So what was the duration of the dive filming the hydrothermal vents?
Well, the average dive would be 6 to 7 hours. So and that's kind of normal for a lot of the submersible work, but I mean your limit on that is generally, the mirrors used to go for 12 hours. And a lot of that, of course, is just, descent and ascent. That's a couple of hours each way.
And those, I've seen the films of the hydrothermal vents and the life that's around them. It's just phenomenal, aren't they?
Oh, they're fantastic. And that's that's the cradle of civilization in many ways, right? That's the beginning of life on our planet. Yeah. And so that's, you go down and like everybody has a different mission and whatnot. And so, there are geologists, there's, chemists, there's biologists. There's a whole slew of different people that are going to want to see exactly what's going on down there. And so all the more reason when you're trying to collect this footage and putting cameras on there to do the absolute best that you can do with, and there's always a budget and there's always a time frame, but not to just say, well, that's good enough. No, don't ever accept good enough when you're going to these places. And again, it's a once in a life, even if it's not a quote once in a lifetime, every time you go down there, it really is. Because all right there, we were funded to go out on that because there had been an eruption the year before. And so all of this work, we actually got, Emery Christoph was out with us. And so we got out and we were filming, these old experiments that were buried in lava, half sticking out. And it was absolutely incredible. But again, so all of that data that they had been collecting for years, now it's purely just existed in the footage that was left. And so, but where I was going to is that, everybody in the world, they all want to see this footage. And so, some guys, or women for that matter, they want to zoom in, they want to look at like the crystalline structure of the rock. Other people want like, no, wider, what's going on over here? What's going on over here? And you really want, you want all of that, right? And so that's partly what got me into, and of course the 3D, because the 3D was just, when we didn't do too many dives with it, but it was just fantastic in terms of really being able to take a person and put them in this spot. And you can take somebody, pilot's a great example, but a pilot has a fantastic 3-dimensional sense. Take somebody who's never flown anything, put them into a good set of 3D, a good 3D system, and they can almost intrinsically know how to do these things and where to go and judge distance if you set it up right. And that I mean, that's just fantastic. And that was one of the things that I realized. I'm like, oh my God, I mean, everybody has a different, everybody needs something different. But the one thing that I always felt was missing, and still is on most, is like this big situational awareness and this ability to just immerse yourself in that environment, because so few people are going to be able to actually go down and look through the eyes of a submersible. Or even in our case, I mean, how many people, yes, there's a lot more people that get to go diving, but I can count on, one hand the number of people that, have been in to see the engine room of Britannic, for example, or something like that. So when we go to these places, I mean, I really want to find ways to, capture everything and immerse people in it. And so that's what got me into, like we started building panoramic and doing things that could capture live 180. And then ultimately into 360 and VR and stuff like that. And that's not that that's everything, but from when you're going to these places that, again, nobody's really ever going to be able to see, you want to get everything that you can. So capture as much of that environment, light as much of that environment. And of course it's black, so it's only going to be, it's only going to be as lit as the lights that you can bring with it. But it's just, anyway, I mean, I can go on and on about this. So
you were also involved in the I've had a brain fart.
Well, hey,
with Woodsole
to sleep there with rambling
Pearl Harbor, the memorial at Pearl Harbor.
Yes, no, Arizona. Oh, wait, actually,
Arizona.
Right.
Yeah,
Arizona. So that's been one of my. So we do a lot of work with National Park Service. So in the States, we have a series of parks all across the country that are run by national parks. And there's a submerged resources unit, and they've become, friends over the years because we've just done so much work together. And they, one of the deputy chiefs, Brett Seymour, called me up and he's like, hey, we were in Arizona a number of years ago with a regular ROV, and we could never get it all the way in and far enough in. And, we'd like to build something. And I'm like, absolutely. And at this point, there were
I'm going to stop you briefly, just for the benefit of people that might not be aware. Just explain the Arizona.
Okay, you're right. Sorry. So World War II, Pearl Harbor, the USS Arizona was a battleship in Pearl Harbor, and when Pearl Harbor was bombed, it sank, and almost 800. I should know this, but 800 to 1,000 sailors died and entombed essentially in the ship. And they looked at trying to bring it up, but the keel was cracked, and they left it. And eventually, it was turned into a memorial that was inside of an active Navy base, but run by the National Park Service. And interestingly enough, Elvis Presley was one of the people that did a concert and made a huge donation to help get the whole monument going back in the I guess that was the 50s or 60s. So anyway, they these days it's the most popular park, and the most visited park, I should say, in the country. Almost everybody that goes through Hawaii goes out, and the Park Service does just an absolutely beautiful job. But one of their missions is to, the ship still has thousands of gallons of bunker oil in there, and the whole the port is incredibly clean now. And there's always a concern, well, little bits of oil, it's constantly bubbling out. Well, whenever, I don't know, a new admiral comes in, everybody wants to know, well, when's she going to fall apart? When's it going to break up? And so Park Service does a lot to monitor the wreck, and they go out, well, of course they're there, but then the Submerged Resources Unit has gone out on a regular basis to help conduct science ops and whatnot. So in our world and in our country, it's a very big deal. It is the monument really for World War II. And so people are not allowed to dive. It's one of only 2 national parks where you're not allowed to dive. And I mean, I think it's pretty fair and pretty obvious. It is an active Navy base, there's submarines and warships going by. They don't want people diving there. So except under, certain circumstances. So with the Park Service, we've gone and we for years we would go, get a chance to go out, we'd film it in 3D. We started doing photogrammetry. I mean, all this really good stuff to help visualize what the wreck really looks like, because it's amazing. I mean, there's a great story about how the ship's been down there since, the 40s, since 41. And it wasn't until either the 60s or 70s where the Park Service guys went down and said, you know what, we have to actually go down and survey this thing, because we don't really, I mean, no one, I guess it just didn't matter at that point, but they're like, we have to go down and survey it. They went down, they pop up and they're like, there's guns down there. Like, what do you mean there's guns down there? No, everything was pulled, I mean, that's what the record said. But a set of the big guns that actually, well, they're not in that picture, but we're still there. But the visibility was so bad that nobody ever knew.
Right.
So I mean, it's just incredible to think that for 30 years, 40 years, that was just down there and everybody missed it or nobody saw it. So anyway, all the work has always been on the outside. And they started to do this interior penetration work, and they did great stuff for the time, and they got it in as far as they could. They had old cameras, and so it was dated, very dated. And so they called up and said, hey, can we build something that would allow us to go in further? I said, yeah, why don't we take an ROV that carries its own tether and spools it out, so that when you go in, because one of the things when you take a little vehicle into a wreck, if you imagine, you're pulling a tether and you're going, through a hat, through a door, down, in, around, and that tether is constantly being pulled and snagged. And there's probably some cave divers, in the audience, and I mean, we all know what happens when you drag lines through something. Well, the same thing happens with a tether. So our theory was that we basically pull the ROV tether in a certain point, and then we just spool it out, and it lays on the bottom, and then we spool it in when it's time to come out, and we never get snagged, and we could go further and further. And basically, I mean, that's what we did. We did a little prototype and just went in a little bit. It worked, and then we put a budget together, and this was a classic. I love working with TV and I hate working with TV. It has, great moments and moments where you just want to pull all your hair out, what's left of it. Right. So this one, I mean, the producer was great. And he said, I think we've got it. We had a budget. It was like, I don't know, $100,000 to build this thing, right? 6 months and, all this stuff. And we're like, okay. He's like, yep, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. Well, now it's 5 months. We're going to do it 4 months, 3 months, 2 months. We're 2 months out. And I'm like, well, I guess this isn't going to happen, Brett. And I had a family holiday planned for my brother's 40th. We were going to England and France. So literally on the way to the airport, like, we got the money. We're going. I'm like, oh my God, you've got to be kidding. So, 2 weeks basically for 2 weeks in France and England, we're making phone calls, finding shops to build all these different pieces, which thankfully we did design it. So we just had to fabricate and build it. But then, I mean, we had 6 weeks basically to put this whole thing together. We show up in Hawaii with a box, well, not a box, but like many boxes of parts. We went down to Home Depot, bought every tool, and we had to finish putting this thing together out there. And of course, we had nothing but problems, as you can. I mean, it's a big engineering effort. This didn't seal, that didn't seal. These gears broke. We're making gears by hand. I mean, it was crazy and insane. But at the end of the day, there were 5 survivors left from Arizona, and we took it, I mean, these guys, they lost so much, and they gave so much, and so did so many people that, we weren't just going to let, not sleeping get in the way of success on that. And we, plowed through and, eventually got it, and it worked great. And we went down into all these upper decks and filmed a number of areas that had not been seen before. And I mean, there's still scientists looking and analyzing footage and some of the samples we brought back. And
that's actually a documentary out. Though,
it is. It's actually one of the handful that I'm really proud of, called Into the Arizona.
Right.
So and then you can watch it online. I mean, it was a PBS special. So
just back to some of the other wrecks, the Britannic. How many times have you dived? How many expeditions have you been on?
Well, I think 5 expeditions. So Britannic is Britannic, as far as a diving story goes, Britannic's like the love of my life. I mean, she's the one I just enjoy, and I will never say no to a trip to go there. But I also, you know, I want to do things. I want to do, I want to go and explore and film and be able to show, show people what is so unique about it. And of course, there are other ships, they're prettier and whatnot, but there's something about the fact that my whole career has been tied into Titanic. I've had a number of trips to Titanic. I even got married coming back from Titanic. And there's something about being like all of these things that we've seen on Titanic and being able to swim down these intact hallways. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful wreck with an incredible story. And so, and of course, a tragic story too, because, our expedition leader and good friend, Carl, died there in 2009. And go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, I just read your story.
Oh, yeah.
in Straus's book, Close Calls.
Oh, yeah.
About your experience on there. That was, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been, I mean, I love, so one of my favorite Britannic stories is, we were always trying to, all right, so everybody knows Titanic took a couple of hours to sink. Britannic, the sister ship, was already being made, but they made a bunch of changes based on Titanic sinking so quick. So, and yet she went down in 40 minutes, she went down in less than half the time. Right. And so there's been a lot of theory as to exactly why she went down. And, I mean, at the end of the day, there's a number of contributing factors, but one of the big ones were, these boiler room doors, these watertight bulkheads that were supposed to be shut. And now when it hit the mine, a number of them would have been damaged, but we really wanted to get in and film and see. I mean, maybe they were all open. Maybe a couple of them didn't. What exactly happened? It's these niggling little questions that keep us up at night, which is insane because it makes absolutely no difference in the world right now. Like, but it's what drives a bunch of us, unfortunately. And so at this point, there'd already been exploration a little bit and we were just going to, continue further. And so Richie Kohler and I went in, and we went.
What sort of depths were you at?
Sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's at 360 feet. So basically 115 meters. And to get there, you go down on a 1,000-foot liner, basically. Go down, there's a crack, you follow the crack down, there's the old fireman's tunnel, and it was sort of towards the bottom of the ship. And, you go down what's left of this hallway, there's cables, it's twisted, you go through these boiler room doors, and then, wow, all of a sudden there's just these boilers stretched out floor to ceiling in front of you. And it's kind of like a little mesmerizing, and there's a beauty there. There's an engineering beauty that's just pretty, it's just fantastic to admire. But of course, we're not there to admire. We're there to, at that point, go. So like I said, we already had a line. So went in the line, and to do that, you go through a set of boilers, you drop down, you go through another doorway, and this was one of the watertight bulkheads, and we wanted to get to the next set. So I went down and I made a very big tactical error. There was a reel that had been in there for a while, and I was like, you know what? I keep getting these reels caught. So I'll have my little emergency reel, but that's just a tiny little finger spool. But when I get in there, I'll just take that reel and keep running it. And I totally spaced on, dissimilar metals. And it was an aluminum reel with a stainless steel nut in it. And so when I got down there at 370 feet, already 20 minutes into this dive, I'm sitting there, I'm like, I can't get this reel to open at all. And I'm like, what the heck? All right, what am I going to do? Do I just turn around? I didn't want to deploy the emergency reel because that's even worse protocol. So I'm like, you know what? Progressive penetration. We've done it a lot. And I'm like, I'm just going to go ahead. So I look at it. I'm like, okay, from the edge of this reel, there's a little bit of a void because, of course, the ship's on its side. Now you've got a void below you. I'm like, I put my fins here. I can reach the other side. No problem. So when I come back out in a silt out, I can stop. I'll feel the void. I make sure my fin tips are at the base, and I'll reach over, and boom, that's how I'll find the reel. And so I go, and then I proceeded, and now I'm going through another set of boilers. And the boilers, I mean, it should be fairly straightforward, right? But on my right-hand side would have been the flooring between them, and there were holes in the flooring that it's not that you could probably, I don't know that you could get in there and really get caught, but you could definitely get yourself into a little bit of a mess if you went in there. So on the way in, it's, of course, it's beautiful viz. No one's been in there in 90 years, 100 years. And I'm like, all right, so coming back out, the boilers literally come together like this. And I'm like, I could take my fingers and touch both boilers on the way out. So that's how I'll get back out. And I came to the edge of the boiler in the end. And now there's a bigger, I forget what the room is called exactly, but it's almost twice the distance. And I'm sitting there going, all right, I think I can do this, but I'm getting pretty close to my time. And I'm just sitting here. I'm like, all right, but all right, the viz won't be that bad. I'm kind of running through all these scenarios in my head. And this was the first time ever in my diving career that this happened. But all of a sudden, images of my son came into my head, like running down a hallway. And again, first time ever. And it just completely took me out of where I was. And I'm like, wow, if that's not a sign that it's time to turn around, when your focus is gone like that, I mean, you're on the edge, you're in 380 foot. A couple of minutes makes a big difference. And if you get caught, we had a plan. I mean, Richie was not there with me. He was back, and at 30 minutes, he's out. And I mean, that would have been the end of it. So anyway, turned around, and of course it was complete and utter silt out. I have some great video of mud from inside, and that's how I get, at that point, fingers up on the side of the boiler, got all the way out, no viz, fin tips at the end, felt the reel, managed to get through, and then the viz opened up, and that was it. But man, I mean, it was great. It was like, scary. I mean, it was just everything. But we got in and we're able to get into places again that nobody had been to. And that's part of the excitement, isn't it?
You just led just this year.
Oh yeah.
Fairly recently, you were the leader of another expedition there.
Absolutely. Yeah. We got back a month and 4 days ago now.
Yeah.
Not that anybody's counting. But that was, so in 2009, when Carl died, I mean, the initial reaction with the effort in Greece was just, no going inside of Rex, period. And they basically locked it down. And a year or two after, I started applying and saying, every way that we could, can we get permission to go back in? We're working with the owner of the shipwreck, because many people don't know that, but there's actually an owner to Britannic, even though it's in Greek waters. And it took us 10 years really, because we did get our permit last year to start going inside again and conducting, exploratory and scientific operations. And so COVID canceled it last year, and then this year it was very close to getting canceled again. But we, for a number of reasons, COVID, of course, being a big one, but we ended up with an Explorers Club Discovery Expeditionary Grant, which really, in many ways, helped save the day for us, because we were still going to go, but it was really going to be fairly a pretty tiny team, because people were just afraid, like, you can't commit. It's hard to commit $10,000 to $15,000 of your own money. And then what happens if you get there and they clamp it down, and you've just wasted, not only vacation, but money and just all that kind of stuff. And so the Explorers Club and Discovery, they became sponsors, and we got in, and in 10 days, I had more dives on that wreck than the last 3 combined. And we were able to go and hit a lot of our goals, get deep inside the wreck, and just go to places that no one's been able to see before.
You had, who was on that? Richie was on it with you?
Yeah, Richie Kohler.
Stewie from Ireland.
Yeah, Stewie Andrews, Barry McGill, Richie Stevenson, Eduardo Pavia. One of the best things for me on this expedition didn't have anything to do with being on the wreck, but a lot of these expeditions, I mean, so I've been doing them for 15 years. We have had the age curve keeps moving up. I'll put it that way. You know, I mean, we're not, I mean, not to say there aren't young people that are interested in going there. There are, but we just don't have that opportunity very often. And there's a big, you know, it can cost a lot. And so when the Explorers Club was able to sponsor it, we were able to get a couple of safety divers, and basically they are working their way up. I mean, well, actually, one of them was already capable of diving the wreck. But, you know, I mean, we all sort of have this mentor program when you're diving, right? I mean, you come, you support. So we had, you know, come and support our dives, and then we'll keep bringing you out, and we'll try to get you out on the next expedition. And we had 2 young women who were able to come out and be our support divers, and that. It's so important, you know, because again, you know, none of us can do this forever, and it's important to like keep passing that torch along and bringing people out and getting the next generation or two generation, whatever it is, but getting them excited about this stuff, because it is exciting.
Because regrettably we've got a finite amount of time, but there were all of these other expeditions that I wanted to talk to you about. There was the Apollo 11 engine recovery that you did. The revenue cutter, the Bear, that you've done this year, the US. And that's quite an historic vessel, isn't it, for the USA?
For the US and for sort of Arctic exploration in general. It was one of the first, I think it was the first revenue cutter, which is our modern Coast Guard. So it was like essentially the first Coast Guard ship. It went up into the Arctic. It was involved. There was a very famous captain called Healy, was his last name, Captain Healy, who, you know, I mean, you got to think, I mean, like in the 1800s, he's going up to Alaska and, you know, bringing to a certain extent law and order, but also big humanitarian aid. I mean, that ship was largely responsible for saving several, Inuit populations up there. At one point, they even brought in 100 and some odd reindeer to help feed a number of people that were, sort of trapped. I mean, there's just the stories on that ship are endless. And of course, it ended well. So there's too much for just a couple of minutes, right? But it was up in the Arctic. It was involved in Antarctic expeditions, and it started its life as a SEAL ship, and eventually it was on its way back. Well, it was brought up to Canada, and somebody realized there was a restaurateur in Philadelphia who realized, you know what, we could make something of this, and so they towed the ship. They were towing the ship back down to Philadelphia when it foundered. And so we went out with NOAA and the Coast Guard and just this past summer and got to film it. And there's all these questions like, how much, are we really sure? And you spend all this time looking at blueprints, and that's the fun historical part. You know, we're looking at all these blueprints, and I'm like, for a ship that's probably going to have been fished over, rotted, we're all looking at it. I'm like, the bow. I mean, you look at the bow and it's just classic, massive planking, but it had these 4 or 5 steel straps that wrapped across it. Very distinctive. I mean, I've never seen anything like that before. Yeah. And sure enough, we're out there in currents, and it takes us a little while with, that ROV. And we got down, and we're coming up, and we see it in the sonar. And I'm like, okay, we're coming up, and boom, like, oh, well, I think we just identified it, because we land right at the bow. And once the dust settled and the lights got adjusted, we're just looking at these 5 straps. It's like, you open up the book, pull out the blueprint, and I'm like, well, that's about as close to a fingerprint as you can get. So, of course, I mean, then you have to go and continue and whatnot.
What sort of depth was it at, Evan?
Oh, it was diveable, actually. I mean, it was only 100 meters. So, right. But, way offshore. I mean, it took us a day and a half on a Coast Guard buoy tender to get out there. And that was, man, what a great organization and good group of people. But
one of the other ones, now I might mispronounce this, the Gribshunden.
Gribshunden. That is a, I hope Brendan Foley is not watching this. So that's one of the things I've been really fortunate in my career, is that I built up a reputation where, a lot of archaeologists, scientists, they trust us. And so much of this work and the things that we're able to do is based on trust, right? I mean, really in business and life, if you can't trust the people you're working with, why do it? So, we got invited up to come and film it. And then it ultimately turned into a documentary. Now, the Gripshunden, it's a great story it's a great story that I'm not going to do justice to, but it's up in Sweden, and it's, as far as diving goes, it's this shallow dive, and people had been diving it for years, and then somebody went down and noticed something a couple of years, I think by sport divers in the 80s, and it turned out to be a gun carriage. And then some archaeologists put a few things together and there was rumor of a King's flagship vessel that basically blew up out here. And of course they went, and sure enough,
this is from the 15th century.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah. No. It's a part of the Calamari League. That basically, there was that was sort of always a little bit of fighting, I guess, amongst the who was going to be running it. And this was, I think, King John, who was going up, and this was supposed to be a show of force. This is like the modern day. This is kind of like what's going on, between like the U.S. and China in some ways, right? Like there's constantly, people are going to be sending in battleships or aircraft carriers nowadays to, make a show of force. Well, that's what this was, and unfortunately, it blew up. So, it didn't really work the way they planned, and eventually, they came to blows and had a little bit of a battle over it, right? So, anyway, the ship's fantastic, and it's an ongoing excavation. But like when we were there, one of the things that's really neat about it is that it combines two types of vessel construction, and for many people, it's kind of like the missing link. It's Carvel and clinker construction. So. Again, this is probably more information than you want, but it's a combination of sort of old school, imagine Vikings, so like lapstrake, like that kind of, and then more modern ribbing. And it was the first ship they found that actually combined the two of them. And so that's the type of ship that ultimately, or the beginning, that missing link of ship, I guess, before they started going into the great age of exploration. And so, and I mean, the ship is just proving and showing all sorts of really neat stuff. Like, that shipbuilding was taking, although it was built up there, it was getting wood from, the Mediterranean and all sorts of stuff like that. So,
well, it was carrying spices as well, wasn't it?
Oh, everything. Well, because it's a king ship, right? I mean, we found, spices. We found, like an armory, crossbows, coinage, chainmail with writing on it. So they could actually find the armor. Fish skin. I mean, it's just fantastic because the
the photograph of the diver with the exosuit, is that Phil Short?
Oh, no, it's not Phil Short. That was a Greek diver. That was at an Antikythera. That's Brett Seymour. Right. Antikythera was another great one. And and so that was our first year where, we got the exosuit out, and it was way too much time. Unfortunately, the weather was pretty poor. So by the time the exosuit got down there, it really, the project was over, which was a drag because, but it made for some great photo ops, and it does look pretty cool sitting on the bow of your boat. But that was supposed to collaborate, get sort of the, Greek Navy, American engineering firms and diving firms, because that at the time that the suit was, I believe, owned by JF White, which is a commercial diving company up here. But it's just, how can you go wrong with like something like that? I mean, it's just so cool.
What other, very briefly, I mean, you must have a sort of a full diary sort of stretching into the future at the moment. What sort of other projects that you can talk about?
Well, I mean, that's I mean, it's a whole mishmash of different things. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
one of the things that I really yeah, I'm sort of kind of in like the second half of my career in many ways, right? And I'm trying to find things that are you know, personally, they feel like they're worth doing, right? And so it's a little less documentary, though I still enjoy that. But you know, one of the things that we did was we started working with the DPAA, and the DPAA, we did a film with them on the Tulsa America. And so the DPAA is an organization in our government that goes and tries to find mostly planes, but MIAs
Right.
from the various wars. And so there's a lot, of course, from World War I, World War II in
Yeah.
particular. And so you know, that's something I really want to do more of, because you know, we've got a very unique skill set of, you know, just people that work with us in terms of, you know, diving and combining a lot of different technology to, you know, to survey, find, and film. And you know, some of it will be hopefully just you know, just kind of doing the right thing and trying to find people to bring back home. And then hopefully some of them will be able to help tell part of a, you know, part of the story, you know, both old and new. And at the end of the day, that's really what it amounts. I mean, what's important to me is like just helping people to connect
Yeah.
in some way, and connect to our oceans and connect to our waterways, and just, you know, all this lost history. So
I mean, you certainly, this has been absolutely fascinating. We've never even scratched the surface of some of the projects that you've been involved in. You've done the Bermuda Triangle as well, haven't you? And,
oh yeah, no, that's fun. That's with Mike Barnett. I get to go and film a lot of the stuff there. But even so, Bermuda Triangle, everybody's like, oh, Bermuda Triangle, you know, UFO, ooga booga type of stuff, right? But
yeah.
I mean, of course it's not. But in doing these things, you know, we go down and all through like really the research of Mike, but you know, and talking to fishermen, but we keep finding little bits of history, and okay, you know, we found actually some of the ships associated with the quote Bermuda Triangle. And and that's okay, you know. And so at the end of the day, you know, sometimes, you know, you have to, you know, play the TV game, I guess, you know, and talk a little bit and interview some people that maybe they do believe it, but it gets us out there, and it helps find more, you know, just more lost history, lost people, all that kind of stuff.
Well, mate, I think we're sort of just come to the end of the session, I guess, is before Cushy sort of steps in and stops us. But hopefully we'll get the opportunity to catch up again. And,
yeah, this has been great.
Sing some songs together.
Yes. Well, the last time we did meet, I did kill a Madonna song. That is true.
Yeah.
But yeah, no.
Well,
yes, I've been taking voice lessons, so you know, maybe
and you
next
can
time.
still remember the advice that I gave you about today's dive starts the night before with adequate sleep and rest,
Exactly.
and an absence of alcohol. Yeah.
Yes. Well, you know, that's my day begins now with a nice big giant cup of coffee.
Well, and I'll join you with a. Hey, Evan, thank you.
Trajectories today.
Mate, thank you so much for getting up so early and joining us. That was just fascinating. And hopefully we'll get the opportunity to catch up again live soon. So, Cushy, thank you very much indeed. And over to you.
Yes, thank you both, gentlemen, for joining us today. Really inspiring stories today to share. And we hope to see you both physically at the 8X show sometime soon.
Thank you.
Okay, now for the viewers, if the viewers have any questions for them, please feel free to drop them on our Facebook page, where we will try our best to answer them. Stay tuned for the next session happening shortly, a panel discussion on emerging dive industries in South and West Asia. All right, that's it for now. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.